Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us once again on the Divorce Magazine, which is very much a magazine, an online magazine for people going through divorce. If you haven't seen us yet, try us on YouTube. We've got a LinkedIn page as well. We've got Pinterest. We've got Twitter, which is, well, X, which is to be Twitter. So you can find us on there and loads of articles on our website, thedivorcemagazine.co.uk. So go on there, see what you can find with everything divorce, whether it's legal, whether it's psychological, whether you're looking for counseling, family mediation, we have all of that on the divorcemagazine.co.uk. One of the things I like to say about the magazine is that the articles that you find on there are all written by professionals. So we don't have bloggers who write for us. It's all professionals, qualified people who write, except for those who write from an angle where there's their own experience of divorce and how they managed it or separation. So do join us and see what you can find then. Hopefully, not hopefully, I think you will find that it's quite helpful as it is. You'll find something there. If not, let us know, and then we will add something on there for you. So my name is Dr. Soila Sindio. I'm the founding editor of the Divorce Magazine. And today we have Karen Omand, who's actually from Canada. So we have people from all over, but on the Divorce Magazine. And Karen holds degrees in sociology and thanatology. She'll tell us what that is in a moment. And she has lived experience of living through an abusive marriage and subsequently a very high conflict divorce. Focusing on the often overlooked realm of grief in divorce, she co-founded the Divorce Workshop in 2021 with her colleague Kak Mosna, where they're aiming to empower those on the divorce journey. As a certified grief counselor and divorce specialist, Karen advocates for greater awareness of grief in divorce, aiding both recovery and pre-decision detachment. She's the co-author of the Divorce Workbook, which will be coming out this autumn. So look out for it. And at the end of the interview, Karen will tell us where you can find the Divorce Workbook once it's out. So welcome, Karen.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I have to say that we do have an article by Karen on our website. So
Mhm.
if you want to see, and there'll be her contacts there, although we'll talk about them at the end also. So one of the first questions I'd like to ask you, Karen, is what is a thanatologist? I hope I'm saying it correctly.
You are, I think in every podcast, I get asked that question
Yeah.
because it's a rare degree. I think it's the only one in Canada was at the school I went to. It's a 4-year degree. It's the study of grief and loss of bereavement
Wow. Yeah.
of all different types, like non-death loss, suicide, ethics, like it's interdisciplinary. So
Mm.
but my whole focus is we're trained to look at the world through grief. And so that's kind of what led. I've worked for a lot of years with death loss, but I noticed there's not a lot of awareness in the divorce field about grief
Yeah.
and how much grief there actually can be. So that's thanatology. It's a specific niche area, but well needed. And I don't think it's very recognized in the field of divorce as much. So I'd like to, as we open up and talk about that, I'll share some of my insights anyways.
Yeah. And I think you're right, because when you talk about grief, the first thing that most people think of, the first thought that crosses your mind is death,
Mhm.
in terms of physical death, losing someone that you love. But when we talk about divorce, I've noticed and I've realized that people will talk about an ending, but there's more to divorce than just an ending. And I'm sure this is what we're going to talk about.
Mhm.
So if we start off by talking about just the death of a relationship, I'm sure every relationship has an ending, and it's different for not every relationship has an ending. Every divorce has an
Mhm.
ending. I would imagine that it's different for different people, but
Mhm.
maybe there's some common factors.
Yeah, so in my field of grief, when I look through the lenses and I've worked with people, there's about 4 things that are common. Now, granted, all grief is unique, right? How how we divorce is unique, how we grieve is unique, but certain things I see that's pretty common. One is that they don't even know that they're actually maybe grieving. So they've come to me and they'll talk to me and I'll be like, do you know that I think this is grief? Another thing I notice is not many people for death loss and non-death loss actually know what the symptoms of grief are. Some of them may have headaches or digestive problems or cognitive problems, right? Maybe they can't process or make decisions. And we know divorce is huge at decisions making at the beginning. So there's a lot of symptoms of grief that they don't even know. And I have to make awareness of that. Like we have a sheet in the workbook where I say, take a look at this checklist. And that awareness can help them go, oh, pardon me, go, oh, maybe I'm actually grieving as well, right?
Mm.
It's not just anger and blaming. Maybe there's some major components of grief in my divorce here. And the third one I notice when I've done support groups is I've brought up the feelings of failure. And they generally, in the recovery part, a lot of people I've worked with feel like they've failed. And I think that's society, right? We didn't live up to our vows. Society doesn't like failure, we don't like any bad grades. And so that comes up with a lot of divorce. The last one I want to mention is the post-divorce grief. So if you've been in a difficult bully type of marriage and you get out of that marriage, you'll have to do some processing the fact that you have to accept that who you were married to. And that is a component of grief as well. And that is for myself as well.
What do you mean? Just with that?
Okay, so after you leave a toxic marriage, like you've left an abusive marriage, as you go through the years, and like for me, it's 7 years, I've had to process the grief I felt. I've grieved the fact that I was in that marriage for that amount of time. And so I've had to accept that reality and accept it that, yes, I was with this person for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it was not a good marriage. And so I felt, and others have said to me that they have felt grief about that. Does that make sense to you?
Is it when you say that, is it because you made the choice that somebody grieves about, I put myself in this situation, and not
Yeah.
did I put myself in this situation, but I stayed.
Yeah, stayed and the reality of what that person was,
Yeah.
right? And, for people that have gone through high conflict, you get out and you're thinking that's one step, but there is a grief process of having to accept that, I was in this marriage and I felt that myself as well.
Mhm. And
Mhm.
does that mean then you question your choices, you question yourself?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and you do a lot of reflecting, right? And
Yeah.
I felt it myself many times. I was like, I think I grieved the relationship before I left, but over the last 3 to 4 years, I've had to grieve the fact that I was in this marriage for this amount of time. So it's kind of accepting of who I was married to and the choices that I made. But on that, we have to practice a lot of self-compassion.
Yeah. I was just thinking, if somebody came to me and they said that, thinking of themselves a certain way because they chose to marry this person and stay with this person for a long time, I would want to look after them and say, but you didn't know.
Mhm, mhm,
It's not like
mhm,
you walked in there thinking to yourself, I'm walking into this marriage, he or she is going, or they are going to be horrible to me, but I'm going to go anyway, and I'm going to stay there. It's the not knowing. Yeah.
yeah. That's why for myself and others I've worked with, you have to practice, like you said, there's a lot of self-compassion, right? Like you have to say you didn't know, and you tried your best. Like a lot of times is, you survived, you tried your best. And there is just a bit of a component of grief there, right?
Can I
Yeah.
just ask, do you think that sometimes that you have to be ready to leave a relationship? That
Mhm,
if you leave when you're not ready, you might leave and you might be thinking, maybe I could have tried harder. Maybe he wasn't or she wasn't, or they were not that mean to me. So you leave with questions. And so if you stay for 2 years or 3 years, even after you've thought, I need to leave this relationship, and you stay a little bit longer, it's because you're kind of like preparing yourself to leave and you want to be
mhm,
certain that this is what I want to do.
mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
think there's part of it that asks for somebody to almost wait until you're ready and certain?
Yeah. I think a lot of people that go through divorce, especially if they've been swaying a long time, they have to work themselves up to that decision.
Yeah.
Especially if you
Mm.
have children. For me, personally, I was grieving before I left
Okay.
for quite some time. even though it was not a good marriage.
And they say that about the leaver, the person who
Mhm.
leaves the marriage, they grieve before they leave
Yeah,
and go through, they're almost like 2 or 10 steps ahead of the person that they're
Mm.
leaving. Is that
Yeah.
your experience? Yeah.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. But also, I just want to mention that they detach. I think on average is 5 years, but you can also grieve post-divorce as well, right? Like I just don't, well, like once you leave, there's a lot of relief, but there can also be moments of grief still. So that's what we call integration of grief, where yeah, you're integrating it more. But I just want to mention that, like, I don't want people to think, oh, I've left and then it'll never come up again, because it can for some.
And I've had people say that even when you're relieved to have left, that when the, I don't know what you call it in Canada, here we call it the decree absolute, when the final
Oh, decree,
cancellation,
yeah,
yeah,
decree,
the
yeah.
decree absolute comes through your door
Mhm,
and you
mhm,
open it and you see that the marriage has been dissolved. There's sometimes it's like, oh, it's
mhm.
almost like a moment where you catch yourself
Yeah, yeah,
that,
that's pretty common.
yeah, that it's
I
over.
think I think it's quite final.
Yeah, yeah,
Like it's like the death of the relationship is final with
yeah,
that decree.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard that many times as well.
So when you just started speaking, you were talking about the different stages, or how the manifestation of grief can present itself in
Mhm.
divorce, in post-divorce or in divorce. And we know that there's 5 stages of grief, but when there's the death of a loved one, are they similar to what you go through with divorce, or are there other stages of grief, or how would somebody know that, oh, I am grieving?
So I'm just going to, as a thanatologist, Keebler-Ross is she's the pioneer, one of our pioneers of grief and loss, and palliative work as well. But thanatologists don't use the 5 stages of grief. We we use other models because we don't think, and I think most people know grief isn't linear, right? I think the 5 stages is also good, was used and is still used, where it's the brain likes simple things, right? So it's like, I'm at this stage, I'm at this stage, I'm at this stage. We don't use that. We use more, if you want a different model, is the dual process model, which is by Strobe and Strutt, I think. And it's more of loss orientation here, restorative orientation here, and you ping pang between the both. So you have your loss, so you're grieving here heavy, and then all of a sudden your friend invites you out to go to the movies, and you're in a bit of restorative. So that's kind of a different model that we use. That's one of my favorites. There's other models.
Mm.
So we don't use the 5 stages, as I said again, but this process of going back and forth is more what I see with divorce and grievers from death loss than the stages of grief.
What are the signs that somebody is grieving, or in divorce?
Well, that goes back to the symptoms, right? Like you
Yeah.
can have anger, which could be fear-based, and crying, which is that would be normal. You can be irritable. I
Mm.
find that behaviorally could be changing. I don't know if people really know, as I said before, if they actually know that they're grieving, right?
Mm.
So other ways, overdoing things like overachieving or underachieving, or not interested in doing anything. A lot of time grieving, they get isolated and they feel down, and that's okay, for a little bit. Sometimes grievers avoid.
Right.
They tend to avoid a lot, and I'm okay with avoiding for a little bit, but in divorce, it's hard to, things start piling on. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's eating. Some people eat too much, some people don't eat enough. It can manifest in many ways. The thing about grief too is if they're feeling it, it's going to come out, right? Grief is sneaky that way, right? Like, I had a client recently who started crying at work at a meeting, and she was shocked. And she's like, I can't have this happening. And I said to her, if you don't get it out somehow, however that is, it can be walking and physically thinking your way through it, because there's two different types of grieving styles that usually generally people sway in between them. It's intuitive and instrumental. And intuitive is when we emote our emotions, and instrumental is when we think our way through. And generally people sway between the two. So for her, you know, I told her kind of lean into that a little bit when she's feeling it and work through it through journaling. However, certain tools for certain different type of grievers. Other ones just want to, you know, they want to think their way through it, you know, or to do things with their grief. That can be, you know, different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know this might sound like a silly question, but I know one of the things that I struggle with when I'm working with families or clients where they have had a loss is the question of, but it's been 18 months, why are they still, feeling like this? So it's been 6 months, so it's been, is there, what I'm asking? Is there a time scale where you would meet somebody and they're still grieving their divorce 6 years later, not wanting is 6 years too long? 6 months, 18 months? What would you say as a
Yeah, like,
psychologist?
well, you're the psychologist. You know you know how to work this. Personally, I don't, within a year or two, I don't. It's a huge loss for some people, right? So, and what I look for is baby steps of movement forward,
Yeah.
right? What I look for, there's no closure, right? It's integration is what we call, right? So what I like to see is when I'm working with divorce as well as death loss is baby steps. And if I see little baby steps and they're slowly trying to, but I can tell you, I was doing a grief presentation for a seniors group, and it was a lot of seniors, and some of them are widows and widowers, but there was a lady that came on and she's like, I have been divorced for 20 years and you know how angry I am. And that, that I would
For how
intervene
long,
and
sir?
say, for 20 years, she was holding on to that anger and bitterness. And you could see on her face, right? Like that is when intervention needs, right? Like
Mhm.
she needs someone like you or some grief counseling or something to help her start rebuilding her life up again. So I have seen it a few times.
Yeah.
But generally for most with the right type of support, they recover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a particular timeline.
Yeah.
I like to see little steps.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair enough because, if somebody just stays static, also sometimes, and it continues in that way, I might be tempted to ask, what are they gaining from just staying there?
Mhm.
What are they getting from that? Because it's almost like you don't really want to stay somewhere that's uncomfortable unless there's something else. There's a secondary gain somewhere.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then that depends on how long,
Mhm.
also. Does the reason for the divorce matter in terms of grieving? So two parts to this question. There's the part where the one who's been left and is grieving, or the leaver who's leaving because there has been domestic abuse or there has been
Mhm.
infidelity. Does the reason matter in terms of grief?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me, I've had it where someone was married to someone for 30 years, didn't really know exactly what was like that they were coming, like they were going to get divorced, thought they had a lovely family,
Mhm.
and they come home and decides to tell this other person that they're divorcing her after 30 years. Difference compared to a couple who you've probably worked with that have tried for years to make this work, and they're both just exhausted, and it almost feels like the right choice. And I think for grievers, as we said before, the one that was deciding to leave, like I was grieving before, right? And then the one that was left, they don't have a lot of control. So there's another element of that, right? So I do find the ones that were left to sometimes grieve have a harder time
Yeah.
depending on why, right? So
Yeah.
cheating, financial abuse are big ones.
Yeah, yeah. And also sometimes it can come as a shock.
Trauma.
Like you're
Mhm.
saying with the ones who were married for 30 years and then,
Yeah.
it's like it's all over in a matter of moments.
Yeah. And your whole life kind of like a sudden death.
Mhm.
It's gone. And everything that you've built together and that secure base safe haven thing, that attachment system that you had is just gone.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a lot of support for those type of people.
Mm. That's true. That's true. It's like starting all over again without somebody, but then the person is still present. It's not like they have died, they're still alive. Do you think that the grief that comes from a divorce affects children differently where they're children than, where they're parents? I was just thinking about that as you were speaking.
Yeah, I think
People are-
so.
yeah,
I'm also from a divorced family as a
right.
child, and anytime I transitioned from my mom, who I was very, very attached to my dad and his wife, I would cry myself to sleep, right? So another thing is what parents have to understand is, when you're co-parenting, this is personal as well as I want to just tell you guys this. I'm sure you already know this, but when they're transitioning, you're going to miss them 50% of the time because a lot of people have joint custody now, right? 50-50. The child, though, can be grieving 100% of the time because once if they're with their dad, they could be missing their mom. If they're with their mom, they can be missing their dad. So it's just kind of awareness of that. Yeah, you're really missing them when they're not with you. Just remember that the kids and myself, when I went through it, they're missing the parents all the time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just an
Um,
awareness thing for co-parenting. It's just something I want to let people know that children do grieve. And I think it, depends on, as you said, the layers of loss. But like, one example is like a younger, like 3 to 3 year old could start peeing their like peeing their bed again. Or actually, and I think if I remember correctly, age, the tweens years are pretty tough for divorce, so we have to be mindful of that. And I think sometimes we're so overwhelmed as a parent when we're going through divorce, we kind of forget
yeah.
that our kids are grieving as well about this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of the children and grieving 100%. The
Mhm,
transitioning, sometimes they say, oh, well, you have two homes now, you have two
mhm,
Christmases, two birthdays. It's not really probably what they would rather have. And probably with what you're saying, maybe encouraging parents to just read, read on
mhm,
the on children of divorce, even if it's paying for one session to just have some
mhm,
psychoeducation around what my
mhm,
children might be going through, like you're saying, the teens and the twins and the, those ones who are like 10 to, even babies feel it. Even
mhm.
babies feel the vacuum that
Yeah.
has been left by the other parent not being there, and infants. I think that's really important. Can I just ask how old, if you don't mind,
Mhm, mhm.
how old you were when your parents divorced?
So I was 6 months.
Oh, you were 6 months. So when I say
Mhm.
babies do, then you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never knew
Mm.
my parents together. So I
Right.
never had a mom and dad
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And back then, so this was the 70s, I saw my dad 4 days a month
Okay. 4 days.
because, yeah, so every other weekend.
Yeah.
So I was very, very attached to my mother.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was back then, I think, it's gotten a lot better, but
With your
um,
dad? The close.
yeah, like with shared custody, it's getting better where, I think there's still some struggles with that, but yeah, I protested. I didn't want to go, you know.
And that's interesting because by the time you were from 6 months to the time where you became vocal,
Mhm,
where you were more, I mean, we're talking about another maybe 12 months before you can just,
mhm,
vocalize, let's say, for instance, or another 6 months. But it's almost like you held the knowledge that this is not what I want, although you
mhm,
were just a baby when it didn't, how children say, oh, people say, oh, but children are so resilient. And I usually ask, resilient from what? They don't
mhm,
know anything else. What are they bouncing back from? You
mhm.
know?
I think that's more of a comfort for them
Yeah, yeah.
than in reality what it
Yeah,
is.
okay, yeah, yeah.
I was always pretty when I met my new stepmother, I made it clear at 5 that you're not my mother.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
that's
was.
something that setup you had grown up with it. So there wouldn't,
Mhm.
there wouldn't
Yeah,
have been, someone can assume that, oh no, this is how she grew up. She doesn't know any better. And, so
yeah.
very interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how do you know when a relationship is over? Someone might be watching this and listening to this and thinking, but I'm not sure whether to go or to stay. How does one know that, okay, this relationship is over?
That was like a question I had to really think about because everybody's so unique as well. For me personally, I'll tell you what happened to me is cracks were starting to show up. I would ask my friends certain questions. I would ask my family that were divorced already. I'm like, oh, so how did that go? Like things were starting, I was starting to plan things. I went to the library, I was starting to look up things. And then it kind of dawned on me that I started to talk about it more and I was building up to leaving. Now I was in a very difficult marriage. So that's how I built the courage to leave mine, right? I kind of started planning. I've had clients where they said they were going out, they were embarrassed of their ex. I've had it where they had felt contempt, communication breakdown. The Gottmans, the famous couple in the States, they've done a lot of good research there. I'm sure they have great podcasts that you guys can listen to. But
Yeah.
one of the questions, because everybody asked this, right? How do I know? And I wish there was some golden assessment,
Yes.
right? Where we could give them and say, okay, here, take this book, take this little checklist like the DSM-5 and check
Yeah.
off this. But there's nothing like that, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things I've done to a few clients is said, okay, so if you were to go home and all their things were packed up at the door, like all of it was packed up and they were leaving, I want you to write about that. How would you feel about that? And see what comes up, right? So see how you feel. If you're feeling really terrible about it, then maybe you guys can work it out, or there's just something smaller going on. It's unique to everybody. I don't have a
Yeah.
gold, the right answer for everybody.
I actually think that's a pretty good assessment
Oh, do
of,
you?
yeah, I actually do,
Yeah.
because then it makes it very, very personal.
Hmm.
And somebody might think, oh, okay, I get home and his bags are packed or he's left. How am I going to feel?
Hmm.
And they might think, oh, I'm not sure. So that can kind of say, well, no, you're not sure. So maybe things can work out. If somebody's like, oh my God, please let that happen, let it
Hmm.
be so, then maybe it's time to think. If somebody else thinks, no, I can't do that because of the children, yeah, I think it's a pretty good way of assessing the situation, whether to
Yeah, and I
go.
would like them to write. Like I'd like them to, if they, I love narrative therapy, so it's like write it down. Like maybe
Yeah,
reflect on what you're thinking.
really reflect on it, really reflect on it. Yeah, because
It,
it's not, it shouldn't be a decision taken lightly.
no, it is a huge decision. I think that's why people take so long in leaving because if you have kids, but I'm working with somebody that doesn't have kids, and it's still been a really tough decision. You know,
Yeah, because even when there are no kids, it's still a family. A
it
couple is
is.
still a family.
They're a family, and that's what the one I've been working with. She's like, but they're my family, you know, and that hurts, right? And it's painful.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of the times you'll hear, not just in divorce and in grief, but a lot of the times people say you just have to accept that it's over. You just have to accept that it's over, which is nice. And it's great to say that, and it's true. But how do you get to acceptance? That's a huge step.
Yeah, acceptance in the grief world, there's a couple of things. Acceptance of the reality of the loss, and then on the other end is trying to make meaning out of it all. So acceptance is, so in my field, is, if you think about it, we talked about this already, the layers of loss, right? So um, think about it this way. So we have, when we're divorcing, we have intangible losses, right? Such as your identity, right? And then you have tangible losses, which is like the house, the chattels, right? The stuff in your home, the money that's going out for legal bills, stuff like that. And then, so acceptance of the loss is great. We all want them to get there, but there's a lot of loss to get through, right? And to get through all those layers of losses, you have to know that you have all these layers of losses, and then you have to accept those layers of losses. And then we need to start rebuilding your life. So if you think about it as if you have a house and you have a foundational crack, and the crack is the divorce, and the acceptance is kind of you're slowly trying to heal that crack a bit, but then you're trying to rebuild it with bricks, right? Your new life. You're trying to make meaning out of this painful situation. And once you start doing that, then slowly the acceptance is starting to happen, and then you're rebuilding your life. And that's kind of that making meaning bit again, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, yeah. Making meaning of your experience. Yeah,
Yeah, and integrating that into rediscovering who you are again, right? Like I'm sure you've talked to many people that it's, working on rediscovering who you were and who you are now is part of recovering too. So, but
yeah,
rebuilding your life up, because that's what divorce is too. It is rebuilding the life that you want, or that you've been given, right? Because if you've been left, and the thing is, though, it's funny, as a thanatologist, people always say, well, how do I do this? How do I make meaning? How do and I'm like, I can suggest things for you, but ultimately it's up to you what fills you up, right? And that takes time as well.
yeah,
That's more in the recovery, like,
yeah.
section of a divorce.
Yeah, the recovery can be a long process. And I think what I have heard is for those, earlier on when you were talking about those who will throw themselves into their jobs and to their work, so they will just preoccupy themselves. What I've noticed is that sometimes it can come back later to catch up with them in
Mhm,
one form or the other. Maybe they just don't want to have another relationship, or they jump into another relationship quite
mhm,
quickly, and without having dealt with everything else
mhm,
that was coming from there, and they walk into
mhm,
this one with everything that's there. Let's say I'm your client. Let's pretend I'm your client, and I've come to you, and it's been 3 years since my divorce, and I'm still struggling.
mhm.
I'm going out, I'm seeing people, I'm putting up a front, as in, no, I'm good, it's okay, no, he's happy, I'm happy, and everything. But inside me, I'm
You're
struggling.
still stuck.
And yeah, exactly. I'm still stuck. What advice would you give me?
The thing that I look for most people that are stuck is I want to know what their solid support systems are like, because what type of friends are they doing? So if you have, in my cases that I've dealt with, as well as in death loss and divorce loss, is the ones that have the best support systems do better. Okay. So I'm not talking about just friends. I'm talking about, do you have good peer support? Peer support meaning, are you talking to other people that have either gone through divorce, or have been with you kind of at the same time of divorce, but they're good for you, right? They're not making you angry. They're not making you more sad. So peer support I look for. I also look for yourself, right? So that's when, how are they leaning into their feelings? Are they distracting, like we talked about before, avoiding? Because avoidance and grief go hand in hand, because who wants to be in that much pain?
Yeah.
And then the other ones is professionals, like maybe they need to see you, right? Like maybe they need a counselor, they need a therapist to work on their whole life story, right? Like maybe they're feeling at the core rejected, right? And then the fourth one is friends and family. But the thing is with friends and family is, and I actually have an exercise in the book about this, is you need to make sure you're being supported by the right type of friends and family, right? Because sometimes you're not going to be supported if you're picking the wrong people to support you, right? So that's kind of what I look at for first thing, and that's just kind of the thanatologist me, because I've seen it where even with the loss of a child, when I've worked with mothers, which I've done quite often, is if they have this type of support system, which is very difficult loss, they tend to they'll always grieve forever, but they tend to do better than ones that are not well supported.
Yeah.
If that answers some of that question.
It does. It does. And I think that part where you're talking about choosing who's going to be your support system,
Mhm.
who's going to be there for you, because you can have some really well-meaning friends and family who are there on your side, but unconsciously or without, being aware of
Mhm.
it, they'll be fanning the flames of your anger. So they'll be like, so what has he done now? What has she done now? Oh, I would never, you know what? I'll email him
Mhm.
and all of that. I wouldn't take that if I were you. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like choosing who's actually nurturing you.
Right. And is that healthy for you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And I also want to say is if with the peers, that's why I said you got to be mindful of the divorced peers, because if you have one that's like really angry, well, you're
Yeah.
going to feed off that, right? Like we all feed off each other, right? So if they're really angry and you're going to start getting angrier, and so it's just to be mindful of who you're spending time with, because you want to be able to get validated, but you also need to start, moving forward. So those are something that, that I would look at closely.
Yeah, finally, Karen, could you tell us a little bit about your divorce workbook? We've mentioned it just before. It's coming out this autumn. So
Mhm.
just what is it about? Where can we get it? Just how would it help somebody?
So this is going to be on Amazon. We actually included some UK bits in it too, because
Thank you.
yeah, because divorce is divorce, right? Wherever you
Yeah.
go, I mean, it's different cultures, everything. But this divorce workbook, we worked on it for about 2 years, and about 49 of it's 200 pages. About 49 of that is self-test and little workouts that I've designed and Kirk's designed, and they're all to help you engage in the divorce
Mm,
process. So, example, one of them is in the financial information is, are you anxious about money, right? And it's just a simple exercise, and it's a great foundational workbook for those that are exploring or going through divorce. It's not going to replace the lawyer, the mediator, or the counselor, or the financial people, but it is going to give you a good foundational start, because I don't really think many people who haven't been through divorce know exactly what divorce is like. And
yeah.
it's based on 6 units. So the first unit is insights, right? So this is kind of some exercises and some tips on what it's really like. And then there's legal information, like how to keep your legal bills down, how to pick a good lawyer, what does the divorce process kind of look like. And then there's emotions, which is, my favorite unit. And then there's a financial information, and then co-parenting, because that's a big adjustment. No, who knows how to do that? Right? It's tough. And then there's recovery, which is probably the best, easiest unit, right, out of all of
Yeah.
divorce, right? But so, yeah, we've been working hard. We're super excited, and we wanted to do it because we wanted to make it an affordable option,
Yeah.
so everybody could get it, not just, because there's a lot of great stuff out there, but we want to make it affordable for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you're talking about, the different units that you're talking about, it sounds like they can help while you're thinking about it and
Mhm.
and wondering about it to just after you have left. But there are two units there that I think and you put them just both of them right back to back at the end.
Mhm.
One of the big ones is the co-parenting bit, which is always such a big deal. But I've had solicitors saying that a lot of the times the financial bit tends to be the one lingering longest. They can reach the co-parenting bit, and then the financial bit is the one that lingers longest and can end up costing a lot of money. And deciding on co-parenting when you're grieving also, and you're full of anger and you're full of rage, and you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well,
Mhm.
and the kids are not are pretty much doing the same as you. It can be
Mhm.
quite challenging, quite a
Yeah,
difficult
you have
time.
to almost be the best parent at the worst time of your, like, could be if you're, like you're super stressed, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you could be crying, you're having to work, you have to do it all, and you're doing it all on your own now,
Yeah,
however
yeah,
percentage of the time.
yeah.
And this better than I do, but a lot of times you have to learn to repair, right? So if you over speak with your kids, or you're a little bit irritable, or you shout or something, you show up as a human and say, you know what, mommy's just having a bad day and I'm very sorry. And um, so,
Exactly. the number of times that I say that to parents, and I'm not just saying the ones who are going through divorce, but also just when I'm running parenting groups, and I just say, if you make a mistake and you know you've made a mistake, just say sorry. Just say sorry. It's not going to show you as being weak or, but it's just saying, you know what, no, you're right. I shouldn't have said that. Really sorry about that.
Yeah.
And also when parents argue in front of the child, which can happen and will happen during divorce, almost certainly, I would say. And sometimes I'll have parents who will be, oh no, we had this really huge argument before when he came to drop off the children. And I'll say, so were the children there? Yeah, they were there. So what have you said to them? Oh no, nothing. We haven't talked about it. And exactly. And I'm like, well, you might want to talk about, because they have not forgotten. It's not like they forget about it. Just talk to them about it and say, I'm really sorry that you saw what happened, or you heard what I said to daddy. Not right, not good. I'm really sorry that I put you through that.
Another thing I want to mention too, as a child of divorce too, is the tension that is felt with no talking.
Yeah.
So transition days, there's absolutely silence, but the tension a child feels, it's like thick. And I would think it would be mindful for everybody that's going through this is you may just want to try to act civil for the child's sake. So you don't need to talk like no tomorrow. You just say hello and try to just make it as easy. Win the Oscar, whatever you have to do. Hello,
I like that.
right? Just hello here, yes. You know what I mean? And it could just help the kids, because I felt a lot of anxiety on transition days, and it wasn't like they were always fighting in front of each other. It's just the heaviness of it all.
Yeah. 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 I have one last question, just because we're talking about, I want your view on this. I say this to parents, but sometimes they're like, you out of your mind. I am not doing that. I kind of encourage them to still give Father's Day cards and Mother's Day cards. And even though you cannot stand your ex, just not for you, it's from the children. Let's go get your mama card. Let's go get your dada card. You pick it and then they write it and they give it. Because otherwise, what do you think? You think, yeah,
I think it's good.
yeah,
My parents never did that. But remember the 70s, there wasn't a lot of, I think research was starting back then. So I give my parents, they did the best they could with the little knowledge they had. But yeah, it's very hard to do that. But it is for the betterment of the children, right? Because children are pretty, if co-parenting's done right, children turn out okay,
yeah,
right?
yeah, they do. They do. Karen, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with us and, at the Divorce Magazine. And I hope I know our readers because it's going to go on the divorcemagazine.co.uk website as well.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And it's going to go on our YouTube channel, and then it's going to go on the Divorce Magazine, LinkedIn, and so forth. I can't wait for people to listen to this, because I think the knowledge that it's okay to grieve for a lost relationship, and okay, whether you're aware of grieving for a lost relationship or not, it doesn't mean that you don't go through it. Thank you very, very much for taking the time. And
Well, thank you for having me on.
yeah,
It's really, I have a real passion to try to
yeah,
make more people aware of this, the grief of divorce. So
yeah. Thank you very much. You're doing a good job doing it. Now the work was out.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How can people contact you?
Oh, yeah. So I'm www.divorceworkshop.ca is our website. You can email me at Karen@divorceworkshop.ca, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and YouTube as well. So
Do you work with people just from all over the world?
yeah, because it's grief, like because it's
Exactly.
not legal and not financial. It's like I do all over the world. Yeah.
And you're super qualified as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I try.
Anyway.